There are over 16,000 children in foster care in New York City. CFR works on behalf of many of their families.
We like to say that you're not going to read about most of CFR's families in the newspaper. In the newspaper, you're going to read about really awful situations where, frankly, it seems pretty simple and pretty clear that a child has to be removed from his or her home in order to be protected. But the truth is that most of the families that are investigated by the city or that are brought before family court are not there because of abuse. They're there for what the law calls neglect. And neglect can be anything from inadequate daycare to unsafe housing to depression, even addiction. And most of the families that come before the family court or are investigated are also poor. Now, most of us know families who have really struggled with a crisis, may have struggled with addiction, may have struggled with the loss of a loved one or a lost job. But when families of means struggle with the same things our clients struggle with, they usually have many more resources at their disposal, and they're able to marshal those resources. So they never worry that while they're trying to overcome obstacles, they might lose their children. But for our families, the risk of losing your children is always there.
Karen, a victim of domestic violence, was raped and became pregnant a second time by her abuser. When they learned of the rape, the Administration for Children's Services, or ACS, charged Karen with endangering her older child, Frankie.
When you're a poor parent under investigation by the city, you're facing a bureaucracy that is underfunded and often overwhelmed. We all like a villain in our stories, but in our clients' stories, there's often not a villain, neither the city nor the parents. What the city does, what the bureaucracy does, is often hands a family a formula and expects them to conform to that. And that doesn't always work for every family. Karen is a good example of somebody who was handed a formula that didn't work. Karen stayed with her mother, who was smoking marijuana, and actually asked the city for help. And the city's formula was to say, first, you can't live with somebody who's smoking marijuana, and second, you need to go into counseling and get housing. And that, on its face, sounds reasonable.
So Karen was calling this domestic violence hotline every day looking for a bed, and nothing was opening up. And, ACS was calling her every day also and saying, you have to get out or else, basically saying, we're going to take Frank.
And this is someone who is really trying. I mean, she doesn't have a drug problem. She's not irresponsible. She's only been responsible and caring and totally devoted mother to her children.
In the space of 3 months, Karen was moved to 3 shelters. Each move meant starting over with the classes the Administration for Children's Services required her to take, and traveling to appointments. Meanwhile, Karen's pregnancy took a dangerous turn. She began to experience preterm labor. ACS would not accept Karen's word that she had been ordered on bed rest and required she continue with her classes.
ACS was having problems with this all along because they kept saying, well, she's not complying with her service plan.
She makes excuses.
During this time, Karen, always with Frankie in tow, had to make multiple trips to the ER.
Each time she would go to the emergency room, they didn't admit her, but she would have a report from the hospital saying she was there, but by the time she would leave the hospital, it was already extremely late, and too late to be traveling with a 2-year-old on a subway.
And every time she moved, our team was there to support her. We helped her find new classes and new services each time. On one occasion, our social worker even interceded with the shelter to say, don't discharge her. She was in the ER. But sooner or later, because of her pregnancy, it happens again. She goes to the emergency room, she leaves late, and this time she breaks a cardinal rule of the formula. She goes and she stays with her mother.
Even the nurses called the shelter to let them know that I was in the hospital and that I wasn't well. They took me out of the shelter.
ACS took Frankie when Karen was kicked out of the shelter. She gave birth shortly thereafter, and her newborn was also removed from her care.
We actually work very closely with ACS on many, many cases. But this time, the combination of being kicked out of the shelter and going to her mother's, in the city's mind, was such a lapse in her judgment that we couldn't convince them to let Frankie and her newborn stay with her. So they put her children with strangers. And then it was time for the lawyer on the team to go to court, fight a legal battle, which we won. and so her children were returned to her.
I can't imagine the trauma, what that's done to her security as a parent, much less what it's done to, in particular, Frank.
Children who spend time in foster care are twice as likely as the general public to suffer from mental illness and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Every time he see the ACS worker, he don't want to move away from me because it reminds him when they took him away. And that's why I'm trying to hold on the best I can, because I don't want to lose them.
So I see CFR's mission as trying to stop the next cycle, the next generation of parents from losing their children.
For the first time in years, Karen now has hope for the future.
I want to be a fashion designer. That's something that I always went for, and I couldn't finish high school. But now I'm trying to get my GED so I could go into college.
We assign every parent who comes through our door a team, which includes an attorney to protect their legal rights, a social worker to help them access the services that they need to parent their child, and often a parent advocate who themselves went through a child welfare investigation, may have had their child removed from foster care and returned. So they've overcome the obstacles that lead to these problems for parents. Formulas don't work for families, and they certainly don't work for children. Formulas don't honor parents' rights, and they can be more expensive than our model.
In New York State, the average length of time a child stays in foster care is nearly 3 years. It costs the government $24,000 minimum per child per year spent in foster care. For CFR clients, the average length of stay in foster care is reduced to 4 months. CFR's costs are $6,000 per family, regardless of how many children are involved. In 1 year alone, CFR saved taxpayers $2.2 million in foster care costs.
Government only pays a portion of what it costs to do this work. For the rest, we rely on foundations and donors who really understand that helping Karen helps her children. We treat CFR's families the way we'd want our own families to be treated. And we do it because we truly believe that every family matters.
CFR, every family matters.